15 years ago, a couple ventured into the vastness of the Allegheny National Forest for a quiet camping retreat. This forest, dense and mysterious, and for years they kept what they saw hidden, unsure if anyone would believe them. The two were ordinary people, grounded and practical, and they rarely entertained fantastical tales. The husband was a man respected by everyone around, with a clear mind and a steady character. They had picked the last week of August for this adventure, setting up camp along the Allegheny River near Warren, Pennsylvania. One night, they awoke to a heavy presence moving around their tent. The weight of its steps was unlike anything they had ever heard. The husband thought it might be a large animal searching for food in the campsite. Still, the sense of something unusual lingered as the night crept by. The following evening, they decided to visit Kinzua Dam, a popular spot for its breathtaking views of the reservoir at sunset. The husband brought his camera, hoping to capture the scenery while the light was just right. It was a short drive from their campsite, and soon they were surrounded by the reservoir's still waters and the expanse of the dam. He took a few photos from atop the rocks, his wife standing by, holding his gear, both absorbed in the quiet beauty. Suddenly, the husband's attention shifted. He motioned to his wife, pointing towards something just beyond the rocks. 40 feet away, in a shadowy patch, were two enormous, thick legs covered in black fur, standing upright. For a second, they were frozen, struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Then, before they could react, the figure leapt into a dense cluster of bushes, leaving a trail of rustling leaves and snapping twigs. The husband, curious and determined to investigate, moved toward the area, even as his wife, struck with fear, begged him to stay back. As he approached, he noticed something unusual in the dirt, a large, circular impression, about 2 feet wide, embedded in the ground. It was as if a colossal creature had left its mark. Nearby, another impression appeared, smaller but equally puzzling, suggesting that more than one creature might have been there, hidden among the trees, observing them. When he returned to his wife, his face was a mixture of wonder and fear. They both began searching the area for further signs, but the forest around them had fallen into silence. With no one else around to witness or confirm what they'd seen, a sense of isolation settled over them. His initial excitement faded into caution, and they decided to leave and head back to the campsite, unsure if they wanted to share what they'd found. When they returned, their neighboring campers were still away, fishing along the river. The couple quietly debated what they had witnessed. The wife asked her husband, almost hesitantly, if he thought it could be something legendary, like Bigfoot. He only nodded, realizing they might have come face to face with one of the forest's hidden mysteries. Later that night, as they sat around their campfire, he admitted that he felt something following him through the bushes earlier. Every time he took a step, he heard another, heavier step from behind, stopping only when he paused to listen. It was as though something had been watching him, mirroring his movements, lurking in the shadowy depths of the trees. For the rest of their trip, they didn't speak of it much, and they never told the neighboring campers. The experience had unsettled them deeply. It felt almost surreal, as if discussing it too openly would make it undeniably real, an event that would haunt them beyond the woods. When their vacation ended, they packed up and returned home, carrying a new private mystery with them. Though the husband continued his passion for photography, the pictures from Kinzua Dam remained tucked away, unshared and rarely looked at. And even though they resumed their normal routines, memories of that night would slip into their thoughts from time to time. The husband would sometimes look out at the woods behind their house, a lingering sense of watchfulness in his eyes. The wife began reading about unexplained sightings in the Allegheny forest, hoping to find someone else who had seen what they did. Years passed before they spoke of it again. One evening, sitting quietly on their porch, the husband asked if his wife still thought about that day at the dam. She admitted she did. Finally, they shared the pieces they had each held alone. His sense of being stalked, her quiet research, their shared sense of awe and fear. It was as if a weight had lifted between them. They didn't need to understand it fully or believe in legends to accept that something inexplicable had happened to them that summer evening. In a small town surrounded by hills in West Virginia, a boy named Sam and his dog, Buddy, shared many adventures. Sam's town was quiet, where everyone knew each other, and life was calm. The most exciting thing each year was the county fair, which wasn't even held in town. You had to drive out to see it. But Sam and Buddy found their fun in the woods, right behind their house. One summer evening, when the sky was starting to turn orange, Sam and Buddy set out for a walk in those familiar woods. Buddy was a small, scruffy dog with a wagging tail and a bark bigger than he was. Sam loved his dog and called him his partner in crime because they went everywhere together. As they walked, the air smelled of pine trees, and Sam felt a thrill of adventure mixed with a hint of fear. Even the spooky things in life seemed exciting when you're young. They followed a narrow path through the trees. Crickets chirped, frogs croaked, and the shadows grew longer as it got darker. The deeper they walked into the woods, the more Sam noticed how quiet it was becoming. Buddy, who usually ran ahead with excitement, slowed down and started sniffing the air. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving the sky a deep blue, the kind that looks almost black. Suddenly, a strange, chilly breeze swept over them. He didn't know why, but he had the eerie feeling they weren't alone. Buddy sensed it too. His ears stood up, and his tail stopped wagging. He stared into the trees, his body tense. Then Sam heard a sound coming from the shadows just beyond the clearing. Sam's heart pounded as he strained to see where it was coming from. That's when he saw two glowing yellow eyes watching him from the darkness. As Sam watched, a strange creature stepped into the moonlight. It looked like a wolf, but it had large wings stretched out from its sides, almost like those of a bat. The creature's fur was dark and ragged, and its body was twisted in a way that seemed unnatural. Sam felt frozen with fear. He could tell that this was no ordinary animal. Buddy whimpered and pressed close to Sam, trembling with fear. The creature let out a terrible screech, so loud that Sam covered his ears. It was a sound that shook him to the core, a wild, haunting howl. Sam knew that they had to get away. Without thinking, Sam grabbed Buddy's collar and started running. He could hear the flap of the creature's wings as it chased them through the trees. The shadows seemed to twist and shift around him as they ran, making the forest feel like a maze. Sam's legs burned with every step, but he didn't dare slow down. He just wanted to get away, to get back to safety with Buddy by his side. The two of them sprinted through the woods, Buddy barking frantically as the creature followed close behind. They zigzagged through the trees, trying to lose it, but Sam could still hear its wings beating in the air. Finally, up ahead, he saw an old shed. It was a small, dusty place where his dad stored old tools and things that were never used anymore. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Sam yanked open the shed door, pulling Buddy inside with him, and slammed the door shut. He held Buddy close as they both tried to catch their breath, listening to the silence outside. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, Sam could see the creature circling the shed. He stayed as quiet as he could, hoping the creature wouldn't find a way inside. Sam and Buddy stayed hidden, not daring to make a sound. The creature's growls and wing beats eventually faded, and finally, Sam felt brave enough to peek outside. The clearing was empty. The creature was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Sam and Buddy slowly made their way back home, both of them exhausted and shaken. The night was calm again, as if nothing strange had happened. But Sam knew what he'd seen, and he knew that the creature was real. When they got home, Sam tucked Buddy into his bed, where he curled up, still a little frightened but safe. One day, on a sunny afternoon, I decided to go biking in a quiet part of the Northern California woods. These weren't the usual trails filled with people. They were the kind of paths where you might go hours without seeing anyone. It felt like the forest had been waiting for someone to explore it, and I was eager to see what adventures lay ahead. The stillness was strange but peaceful, and it made me feel like the trees and I shared a secret. I'd heard stories about these woods before, legends of giant birds that some folks called thunderbirds. They were said to be enormous, almost myth-like creatures that few had ever seen. But honestly, I didn't think much about it as I enjoyed my ride. I decided to stop for a drink and took a moment to catch my breath, leaning my bike against a tree. As I looked around, I noticed something odd. A giant shadow passed over me. I scanned the sky, half expecting to see a low-flying plane or maybe a big bird I'd seen before. But when I looked up, what I saw was beyond anything I could have imagined. There, soaring just above the trees, was a bird so massive that it looked like it could cover a small car with its wings. It moved with such smoothness, gliding as if it was a part of the sky itself. It wasn't flapping wildly like smaller birds. Each movement seemed powerful yet effortless, as though the sky was carrying it along. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The sunlight shone on its feathers, revealing hints of color that seemed to shift with every angle. Not just a plain brown or black, but a mix that almost sparkled as it caught the light. It was like something straight out of an old legend, one of those creatures you read about in books but never expect to see in real life. I was completely captivated, frozen in awe. I could barely breathe, watching this giant creature drift through the air above me. For a brief second, it felt like the bird noticed me. It tilted its head just a little, almost as if it was studying me too. My heart pounded as I wondered whether to be scared or just amazed. Part of me wanted to turn and run, but another part wanted to stay and see what it would do next. Then, it started to circle lower, gradually descending closer to the ground. The breeze from its wings stirred up leaves and twigs around me. I could feel the wind rush past my face, and it was so powerful that it felt like a storm had just passed by. The strength of this bird was clear in every beat of its wings, and I felt like I was standing in the presence of something ancient and powerful. At that moment, the Thunderbird let out a call, a sound so deep that it felt like it came from the earth itself. It was low and rumbling, not a high-pitched screech, and it seemed to echo through the forest, vibrating the ground under my feet. I was completely in awe, and even though I felt a slight fear, I was more drawn to it than anything. Then, as if to surprise me even more, the bird began to hover in place, its wings moving slowly as it stared at me. For a second, it felt like we shared some kind of unspoken connection, a strange understanding that didn't need words. Time seemed to stand still as we both stayed in that moment, just observing each other. Finally, after what felt like both a long and a short moment, it let out another deep call. With one powerful beat of its wings, it rose higher and higher into the sky until it was just a speck in the distance, then gone. I stayed there, still holding my bike, wondering if it had all been a dream. As I rode back to town, my mind was racing with what I'd seen. Did I really see a thunderbird, or had I imagined it? But as I retraced my path, I saw small signs of what had happened. Leaves scattered on the trail, little twigs broken where the wind from its wings had whipped them around. When I got back, I couldn't keep the story to myself. I started telling anyone who'd listen. Most people looked at me with a mix of surprise and disbelief. but a few, especially the older locals, seemed to take it seriously. One older man, his eyes bright as he listened, told me I was lucky. He said that seeing a thunderbird was a rare sign, something special. According to him, these birds are guardians of the forest, spirits that few are fortunate enough to encounter. The next day, feeling curious and wanting to see if it was all real, I decided to go back to the trail. I looked up at the sky now and then, hoping to catch another glimpse. But the sky stayed empty, just the usual birds fluttering about. It was a cold winter evening, and though I had been patrolling this little Kentucky town for years, something about that night felt strange. Bardstown was always quiet, but this was different. The thick fog clung to the narrow streets, wrapping around the old brick buildings and casting the town in a ghostly glow. I could barely see the tops of the buildings, and even the streetlights seemed dim, like they were trying to stay hidden. My footsteps were the only sound. Normally, I'd hear faint music from a nearby bar or the distant bark of a dog. Each creak of the wooden stoops, each scrape of my boots on the stone felt too loud in the dense silence. Even the owl that usually hooted from a nearby tree was nowhere to be heard. I continued my patrol, flashlight in hand, moving slowly through the misty streets. Just then, I noticed the light outside Moray's bar flickering. That light was always reliable, and now, in the middle of this strange quiet, it cast a shaky, eerie glow. I felt uneasy, a strange sensation running through me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Then, out of nowhere, a low growl cut through the silence. It sounded close. The growl was echoing in the fog. And then, an awful smell hit me, thick, sour, like a mix of rotten eggs and burning rubber. I had to fight the urge to gag. With my flashlight gripped tightly, I moved toward the sound, every part of me telling me to turn back. It felt like the warmth you feel standing next to a bonfire, the kind of heat that prickles at your skin. And the smell only got worse, filling the air with a stench so strong it made my eyes water. I forced myself to look ahead, pointing my flashlight into the mist, and that's when I saw it. A shape, huge and shadowy, stood just within the fog. As the light hit it, a pair of fiery red eyes stared back at me. The creature was tall, with fur that seemed almost red in the dim light, and muscles that moved smoothly under its skin. Its eyes were fierce, locked onto me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The creature bared its teeth, rows of sharp, glistening points that seemed too large for its mouth. Another growl rumbled from deep within its chest, louder this time, making the ground feel like it was vibrating beneath my feet. My heart hammered as I took a step back, hoping that it would stay where it was. But it didn't. It took one slow, deliberate step forward, never breaking eye contact. My hands shook as I backed up, trying not to make any sudden movements. But my foot slipped on a patch of wet stone, and in that split second, the creature's growl turned into a snarl. I froze, terrified that any movement would provoke it. It felt like ages passed as we stared at each other, the creature's hot breath filling the air with that awful smell. Finally, some instinct kicked in, and I bolted. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get as far from those eyes as possible. I raced down the street, feeling the fog swirl around me as I ran. When I reached my patrol car, I threw myself inside, locked the doors and radioed in, barely able to get the words out. I looked back through the windshield, but the fog had swallowed everything. The street was empty, and the creature was gone. The next morning, I returned to that street, hoping to find some sign that it had all been a nightmare. But there, right where I'd seen the creature, were deep scratch marks in the ground, as if something with claws had dug into the pavement. The smell was gone, but the claw marks stayed, proof that what I'd seen wasn't just my imagination. Since that night, Bardstown doesn't feel the same to me. The charm of the old streets and the peaceful nights now seem like a mask, hiding something darker. And whenever I see the fog rolling in, I remember those glowing eyes and that terrible growl. I think about that creature, wondering if it's still out there, watching and waiting in the mist. It's a feeling I can't shake. Like Bardstown holds secrets I'll never truly understand. In a small, remote neighborhood in Australia, I lived among homes that stood in silence and shadows. It was a place where the air was thick with tension and fear. The streets were empty at night, and nobody dared venture outside once the sun disappeared behind the low hills. Everyone knew about the gang violence here. People were afraid, and many had lost family and friends. Houses stood with boarded windows, and the whispers of past horrors lingered in the dark. But there was one house that was worse than any place I'd ever known. It sat at the end of the road, crooked and gray, its paint peeling like old skin. No one dared to go near it. Its windows stared out, black and empty, like hollow eyes. I would walk past it during the day, trying to avoid its shadow. But the nights were the worst. They say it was haunted, that it had seen so much blood that the walls themselves had soaked up the misery and violence. Every night, just as the clock struck midnight, screams would start coming from that house. They were the kind of screams that crawled under your skin, that made your stomach turn cold. They sounded like someone was in pain, like someone was being tortured. The noise would echo through the streets, and I could hear it even through my walls, muffled but still chilling. It wasn't just any scream. It was filled with agony, a sound so raw and desperate that it was impossible to ignore. I would lie awake, staring at my ceiling, trying to block out the sounds. I couldn't help but wonder what was happening there, even though everyone told me that the house was empty. No one had lived there for years. Not since the last family had vanished without a trace. People said that something evil lived there, something dark that fed on the pain and fear of others. The screams would last for hours, fading just before dawn, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. The next day, people would whisper about it, shaking their heads and crossing themselves as they walked past the house. But no one did anything. No one called the police. No one even thought about stepping inside. The house had a history, they said. People who went in never came out, or if they did, they were never the same again. Some came out mute, staring into space, their minds lost somewhere dark and terrible. I was curious, though. I wanted to know why the screams filled the night air. I wanted to understand what could be so terrible that it lingered even after death. So one night I decided to stay up and listen carefully. I sat by my window, looking out at the dark shape of the house, waiting for the screams to start. And when they did, they seemed louder, clearer. I could almost hear words, something garbled and desperate, but the voice was twisted, like it came from another world. It was as if someone or something was watching me from that house. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a deep sense of dread filled my chest. I wanted to look away, to hide under my blankets, but I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the house, on those dark windows that seemed to be staring back at me. And then, in the darkness, I saw something move. A shadow flitted across one of the windows, quick and silent. My heart pounded as I watched, frozen in place. There was no one supposed to be in that house, but I knew what I had seen. The shadow had a shape, a twisted, broken shape, like someone bent in pain. It moved slowly, gliding across the window before disappearing back into the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, staring at the house, listening to the screams that seemed to go on forever. By dawn, the sounds faded, and silence fell over the neighborhood. But the memory of that shadow stayed with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. The next day, I asked an old neighbor about the house. She was the only one who would talk about it. She said that years ago, a family had lived there, a family that had been caught up in the violence of the gangs. The father had tried to protect his family, but they had all been taken, one by one. They said that he had died there, trapped and helpless, forced to watch as everything he loved was destroyed. People believed that his spirit never left, that he remained in that house, screaming in endless torment. I still hear those screams sometimes. They come and go, like a terrible wind, carrying with it the echoes of suffering and fear. The house stands there, silent during the day, but come midnight, it awakens as if reliving its darkest hours. And though I am terrified, I know that the pain in that house will never end, that it will always haunt the streets of our neighborhood.